He studied the routines, the blind spots, the smallest errors in the most careful systems, and he turned them into opportunities. To him, the law was a game of patience and observation, and he always played to win. One night at a high-security prison in Sydney, Darcy examined the gates, the corridors, and the guards' habits. Months of planning had gone into this particular escape. He noticed how the sound of the wind against the walls masked small noises, how the lights flickered in predictable intervals, and how a single guard occasionally lingered too long by the control room. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle. He waited quiet and still, letting the prison's rhythm guide him. When the storm came, it provided the perfect cover. Rain pounded against the roof and walls. Thunder masked footsteps, and the entire prison seemed to pulse with opportunity. Darcy moved, like a shadow through the corridors, invisible to everyone, aware of every echo and reflection. Doors yielded to his clever manipulation, corridors bent to his memory, and locks surrendered without a sound. He was methodical, precise, and utterly calm, as if the prison itself were an instrument in his hands. By the time the first alarm rang, Darcy was already gone. Guards scrambled, searchlights scanned every angle. Dogs raced through the halls, but the man they sought had disappeared into the night. He was gone, leaving only whispers of his presence. Prisoners spoke in hushed tones, some in fear, others in awe, knowing that they had witnessed someone extraordinary. Darcy Dugan walked away from the prison into the early morning mist, feeling the cold rain on his skin and the freedom in his bones. For him, escape was not chaos or recklessness. It was precision, patience, and understanding the rules so well that he could bend them without breaking them. And every time he vanished, he reinforced the legend of a man who could not be locked, a shadow that law could never hold, a mind that always found the path to freedom. Darcy Dugan stood in the shadows of yet another prison yard, listening to the distant hum of the city beyond the walls. Years of escapes had taught him patience, precision, and a strange intimacy with confinement itself. Each prison, each cell, each corridor had been a teacher, shaping him into a man who understood locks, guards, and human behavior better than anyone else. But what set him apart was not only his skill, it was his mind. He saw beyond the steel, bars into the weakness hidden in every system, the cracks that others overlooked, the moments where control faltered. His final escape, the one that would secure his legend, was not driven by desperation, but by the perfect alignment of opportunity and preparation. Darcy had studied the guards' routines for months, noting every hesitation, every misstep, every lapse in vigilance. He had memorized the layout of the prison as a cartographer memorizes terrain, mapping every wall, every hidden passage, every potential escape route. The storm that raged outside on the night of his departure provided cover, masking sound and movement as thunder rolled and rain pounded the rooftops. Darcy moved with a calm that betrayed no urgency, a precision that left no trace. Doors yielded to his hands, corridors guided his steps, and locks surrendered quietly. Guards saw nothing yet. Everywhere they looked, they felt the unease of a man who was always a step ahead. Finally, he reached the outer wall, a fortress of steel and stone meant to hold him in perpetuity. He paused, listening to the rain, the wind, the distant city, and then climbed, his movements calculated, deliberate, flawless. Freedom waited just beyond, and he reached it, slipping into the night without a sound. By morning, the prison erupted into chaos, but Darcy Dugan was already gone. The police searched endlessly, following leads that led nowhere. The prisoner spoke his name in reverent whispers, some in fear, some in awe, all knowing that they had witnessed the work of a man, unlike any other. Darcy walked the misty streets of Sydney, blending seamlessly into the early morning fog. He had proven once again that no walls could contain him, no locks could hold him, no system could anticipate him. The man who had been chased, hunted, and imprisoned countless times had become immortal in legend. Darcy Dugan was not just an escape artist, he was the embodiment of defiance, intelligence, and relentless will. And even decades later, his name inspired fear, admiration, and the belief that true freedom belongs to the mind first and the body only follows. Darcy had been inside Maitland only a short time, but he already knew the rhythm of the prison. The guard's shift changes, the slight creak of the iron doors, the hum of the night air through the windows. All of it was data he absorbed like breathing. He waited, patient, letting hours stretch, until the patterns aligned perfectly. Then, as the fog thickened, masking his presence, he acted. A small piece of metal, cleverly hidden, manipulated a lock with a precision only he could achieve. The door yielded quietly, and Darcy slipped into the shadows beyond. Inside the corridors, he moved like a whisper. The echo of his footsteps was swallowed by the mist, and the patrolling guards never noticed the subtle shift in the air. Every turn, every step, was calculated. He had walked these paths in his mind for days, imagining every guard's response, every obstacle. The prison became a maze of shadows and silence, and Darcy knew it as if it were an extension of his own body. At the outer wall, he paused for a heartbeat, listening. The night held its breath. He climbed, careful not to disturb the loose stones beneath his hands. The fog wrapped around him, hiding him from the searchlights that swept the grounds. When he reached the top, he looked down at the yard below, empty and still, a perfect reflection of the patience that had brought him this far. Then, without hesitation, he descended into the waiting darkness beyond the walls. By dawn, the prison discovered the empty cell. Alarm bells rang, guards shouted, and search parties combed the grounds, but Darcy Dugan was gone. There was no trace, no clue, only the knowledge that he had walked through a fortress designed to hold men, and had vanished as if the walls themselves had rejected him. Whispers spread among the prisoners, even hardened. Criminals who had spent decades behind bars spoke his name with a mixture of fear and awe. Darcy did not celebrate. He walked the foggy streets silently, blending into the early morning mist. He understood that freedom was not only about leaving a prison behind, it was about remaining untraceable, unseen, untouchable. Every escape refined his mind, sharpened his instincts, and reinforced a truth he had learned long ago. A body can be caged, but a mind with patience, skill, and audacity is unstoppable. And as the city slowly awoke, unaware of the shadow that had passed through its heart, Darcy Dugan disappeared into legend once more, leaving behind only a story that would grow with every telling, every whisper, every awestruck gaze of a guard who realized that the impossible had just happened. Darcy Dugan sat in the dim light of his cell at Parramatta Jail, tracing the patterns in the brickwork as if they were a map. Every wall, every corner, every lock was part of a puzzle that only he could solve. To anyone else, it was a prison. To Darcy, it was a labyrinth built to test his mind, and he relished the challenge. He had learned that patience was the most powerful weapon a man could wield. Every guard's movement, every shift change, every creak of the iron doors became a rhythm he could predict, a rhythm he could exploit. The prison felt alive to him. He noticed details no one else did. The faint sound of water dripping behind a wall, the subtle vibration of footsteps through the corridors, the tiny gap beneath a door that could be widened with a careful push. Darcy moved slowly, deliberately, not because he had to, but because haste was the enemy of precision. He imagined himself outside the walls in the streets of Sydney, free and invisible, and that vision guided every action he would take. The night of his escape arrived with a storm that drummed against the windows, masking his movements with thunder and rain. He worked quietly, bending locks, slipping through corridors, moving like a shadow that the guards could never catch. His mind was sharp, calculating every potential risk, measuring every second. The prison was a maze, but Darcy had memorized it in ways that no diagram could capture. Every turn, every locked door, every bolt became part of a choreography he had perfected over years of study and experience. When he finally reached the outer wall, he paused for a moment, feeling the storm against his face, tasting freedom in the wet air. The guard's lantern swung below, searching, unaware of how close he was. He scaled the wall with careful, deliberate motions, each movement precise, each hold secure. At the top, he looked back at the prison one last time, a place that had tested him and failed. Then he slipped into the darkness beyond the stone, unseen and unstoppable. By morning, Parramatta Jail discovered its empty cell. The search was frantic, yet Darcy Dugan had vanished once again, leaving only the echo of his presence behind. Every guard knew the truth. He was not just a man. He was a force, a shadow that refused to be contained, a mind too clever to be caged. And in that quiet realization, his legend grew, untouchable, unstoppable, a ghost in the system that could not be trapped. Darcy Dugan had become a name that haunted every police station and prison in Australia. His escapes were no longer surprises. They were challenges thrown at the very system built to contain him. Authorities tried everything: stricter locks, higher walls, constant patrols. Every new measure only fueled Darcy's ingenuity. He sought control. A lock, a chain, a bolt. These were the barriers that tested him, and his instincts told him he could bend them to his will. His first arrest came for something almost insignificant, a petty theft, a minor break-in, but even then the authorities quickly learned they had underestimated him. Locked in a cell meant, for hardened criminals, Darcy studied every detail. He memorized the patterns of the guards, the creak of the hinges, the momentary lapse of attention during the shift change. Every night, as the prisoners slept, he mapped the weaknesses in the prison's defenses, noting the small inconsistencies that no one else noticed. It was not defiance that drove him, it was precision. He understood that freedom was a reward earned through patience and strategy, not brute force. The night he made his first escape was rainy, the kind of night that blurred shadows and silenced footsteps. He had been in the cell for less than a week, yet he had already found the rhythm of the place. Guards moved in predictable cycles, doors clicked and locked with patterns he could anticipate. Using a small metal clip he had hidden beneath the mattress, he manipulated the lock with quiet efficiency. Every second was measured, every breath controlled. When the door finally clicked open, it was almost anticlimactic. No alarms, no shouting, just the soft sound of freedom as he stepped into the corridor and vanished into the night. Word of Darcy Dugan's escape traveled fast, but it was the manner in which he eluded capture that cemented his growing reputation. The police scoured the city for days, combing the suburbs, questioning witnesses, setting traps, but every lead ended in frustration. He did not run aimlessly. He did not hide in obvious places. He disappeared only to reappear weeks later, always a step ahead of the law. And with each escape, his confidence grew, as did the legend surrounding his name. By the time he reached his early 20s, Darcy had been arrested and released more times than most men could count. Each prison became a proving ground, each guard a student in his personal study of confinement. He discovered that fear and authority were tools as manipulable as the locks themselves. A guard's hesitation, a warden's overconfidence, the sound of footsteps echoing down a corridor, all were data points that Darcy absorbed and used to his advantage. To him, prison was not punishment, it was a challenge, an opportunity to demonstrate mastery over the systems designed to break men. Even the hardened criminals in his cells came to watch him, fascinated and unsettled by the way he moved, the way he thought. He did not brag. He did not boast. He simply existed, calm and deliberate, a quiet storm of intellect and audacity. And when the day came that he disappeared again, leaving behind only a whisper of his presence, every man in the cell understood that Darcy Dugan had done something no one else could. He moved through the corridors like a shadow. The guards, trained to detect disturbance, noticed nothing. The storm outside masked the faint sounds of his passage. Darcy slipped through doors, climbed over barriers, and finally reached the outer wall. At the top, he paused, for a moment listening to the rain, feeling the wind against his face. Freedom was so close it tasted like the storm itself, wild and untamed. Then, as though the universe had acknowledged his skill, he disappeared into the night, leaving only a faint trace of his presence. The city woke to the news in the morning. Newspaper headlines declared it impossible. The police were baffled. How could a man escape a prison designed to be escape-proof? Inside Long Bay, every guard whispered about him, some in fear, others in awe. Darcy had done what no one else could. He had turned steel and shadows into allies. His reputation spread like wildfire, and with each escape the legend grew stronger. Yet Darcy Dugan was not satisfied with mere notoriety. He understood that every success attracted attention, and attention was both a weapon and a danger. He began to refine his methods, learning to disappear without a trace, to make prisons appear impenetrable to the outside world while knowing every weakness from within. Each jail became a classroom, each cell a teacher. And in every escape he proved one unshakable truth: walls can hold bodies, but not minds. The authorities redoubled their efforts, but Darcy was always ahead. Every new prison became another chance to prove that genius and patience could overcome even the most formidable barriers. And as he looked out over the rain-slick streets of Sydney one night, knowing that the law was searching for him again, Darcy Dugan smiled quietly. He was not a criminal in the ordinary sense. He was a man who had redefined freedom, and nothing could hold him for long. The night was thick with fog as Darcy Dugan approached the walls of Maitland Jail. The prison loomed like a fortress in the dim glow of the moon, its towers casting long shadows that twisted across the cobblestones. Guards patrolled the perimeter with routine precision, unaware that Darcy had already studied their every step, memorized every swing of the lanterns, every interval between footsteps. To them, he was just another prisoner, but to himself, he was a strategist, a man calculating the perfect moment to become invisible. This was only the beginning. The early escapes were small, almost experimental, but they shaped him into the man who would become Australia's most notorious escape artist. Every cell, every lock, every fortress of stone was now just another puzzle. And Darcy had learned the ultimate lesson: freedom was never given. It had to be taken. By the mid-1950s, Darcy Dugan had become more than a name whispered among prisoners. He was a living legend, a man who had turned every prison in New South Wales into a stage for his audacious escapes. The authorities began to treat him differently, not as a mere criminal, but as a challenge, a problem that required more than brute force to solve. Yet for Darcy, the thrill was not in evading capture alone. It was in understanding the prison and seeing beyond the walls and the bars into the patterns that dictated confinement. He saw every lock as a riddle, every guard's movement as a piece in a grand puzzle. Long Bay Correctional Complex was one of the most secure prisons in the country at the time. Its walls were thick, its corridors long, and its gates nearly impregnable. Yet when Darcy arrived, it was as if the walls themselves were inviting him to test their strength. He studied the routines, watched the guards, and memorized the blueprints that he had glimpsed from his earlier cells. Every detail mattered. The timing of the patrols, the sound of the doors locking and unlocking, the flicker of lights that marked the shift change. He learned to read the prison as others read, newspapers absorbing information others overlooked. Darcy's escape from Long Bay would become one of his most infamous. It began with patience, a virtue that had become as essential to him as breathing. He spent weeks observing, noting, the precise moment when a guard would pause at the end of a corridor, the fraction of a second, when a camera's angle shifted, the subtle differences in how the keys jingled in the guard's belt. Then one night, during a storm that masked the sound of rain against the metal gates, he acted. Every movement was deliberate, every breath measured. The lock yielded under his careful manipulation. A quiet click that seemed to echo louder than the thunder outside. Rain pelted the empty streets of Sydney like shards of glass. A lone figure crouched in the shadows outside the prison gates, watching the lights flicker in the guard towers. Inside, doors clanged and metal gates groaned, but for Darcy Dugan, the walls of the prison were nothing. More than obstacles to be measured, understood, and ultimately outwitted. He moved like a ghost in the night, quiet, deliberate, invisible to anyone who did not already know him. Darcy Dugan was not just a man. He was a legend, a name whispered in fear and admiration across the penal system of Australia. From his first arrest, he had shown a talent that defied ordinary confinement. Lock him in a cell and he would be gone by morning. Place him in solitary and the guards would find only an empty bed. His escapes were never chaotic or violent. They were precise, calculated, almost artistic, as if he treated every lock, every gate, every bolt as a puzzle begging to be solved. No prison could hold him. Not Maitland, not Long Bay, not the fortified high-security complexes, designed for the most dangerous criminals. Every barrier became a challenge, every guard a variable in his mental map of freedom. And yet he was more than a criminal. He was a symbol of defiance, a man who seemed to mock the very idea of authority. On one stormy night in the 1960s, as lightning fractured the sky over Sydney, Darcy executed one of his most daring escapes. Locked behind bars that had never been breached, he slipped through the fortress-like walls with a skill that seemed impossible, leaving only the faintest trace of his presence, a door slightly ajar. A hinge quietly shifted, a shadow moving just beyond the guard's sight. That night, the city learned once again that Darcy Dugan was untouchable, a man who refused to be caged. But his story was not just about escapes. It was about the mind behind them, the intelligence, the patience, the audacity. Every attempt to trap him, every plan to contain him only added to his legend. And with every narrow escape, Darcy Dugan's name grew louder, spreading like wildfire through the corridors of every prison in Australia. This is the story of the man who could not be locked, the man who turned prison walls into playgrounds, the man whose brilliance terrified the law and fascinated the public. This is the story of Darcy Dugan, Australia's most notorious escape artist. Darcy Dugan was only a teenager when he realized that the walls that held other men imprisoned could never hold him. He grew up in the outskirts of Sydney, a rough neighborhood where opportunity and law seemed equally distant. The streets taught him lessons no school could, lessons in observation, patience, and subtlety. Every fence, every alleyway, every locked gate was a puzzle waiting to be solved. And Darcy had a mind that hungered for challenges. He did not steal out of malice, nor did he seek violence for sport.